right. What a great day we're having. So I want to continue it to talk a little bit about TV. I'm currently a design director. Oops. There we go. I'm currently design director at this also. We're a small digital product design studio based in Brooklyn, New York. And I haven't really planned it this way, but I just keep finding myself working on TV projects throughout the past several years. Some of these include this really cool smart touchscreen remote control called Ray. Working on different products for HBO across a number of different platforms, and more recently working with the Xbox team at Microsoft to think about the next generation of the UI. That's the Project Scorpio stuff for any of the gamers in the room. Some really exciting stuff coming out with that. So I started writing and teaching about TV design sometime early last year because aside from some user interface guidelines from companies like Apple and Amazon, there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge sharing happening among designers working in this space. But it was very much in the weeds, really focused on the tiny design details. What are the things like the type sizes to make the most functional and usable experience? And that stuff's really important. We're going to cover a little bit of that today. But one of the privileges of attending conferences and certainly speaking at conferences is the ability to take a step back, to think a little bit more about the context and the landscape of the things that we're designing, what's actually happening around these experiences that we're designing. And then once you start to dig into that, you also start to think about how did we get here and why are we here? So today we're going to start a little bit back. Way back to 1939, this is when New York hosted the World's Fair. Now this was a really big one. This was the first of these world expositions that was themed on the idea of the future. One of the taglines was building the world of tomorrow. If you went to this event, there was a ton of tomorrow to be seen. You could go to the Futurama Pavilion and sit on this big moving carousel and peer down at the city of tomorrow. You could visit any number of exhibits, including this one about what roads would look like if we had self-driving cars. Remember, this is 1939. We were already talking about self-driving cars. You could even meet Electro, the smoking robot. Apparently, the Turing test of 1939 was whether a robot could smoke a cigarette. But something else really big happened here, something that impacted all of our lives. This is that RCA, known as the Radio Corporation of America, decided to essentially debut TV to the public. Now, TV was a little bit maybe like how VR is today. People knew about it, but it was wildly expensive, and likely they had never seen it in person. In fact, as they were doing these public broadcasts all throughout the fairgrounds, they were so concerned that people would think that they were just tricking them, that they actually made these really cool, clear TVs, so you could see all the inner workings and know that this was a real technology. So if you attended this event in 1939, you would have left with one of these pins, and I think very much feeling this way, like you had seen the future. In just a few years, you were going to have self-driving cars and a TV in your home. But remember, this was 1939, and just 6 months later, World War II started. And all of that energy and enthusiasm was dampened. All of that engineering and materials and science, they were redirected towards the war effort. But fortunately, the war ended. And as the men came home, we started to think about the home in some different and exciting ways. There was a lot of optimism after the war, particularly in the United States. Suddenly, all of that science, engineering, brain power could be diverted back home. And this opened up a lot of possibilities for us as designers, as engineers, as consumers. So we started exploring these ideas for the home. We did this in the form of magazine spreads. This one from Popular Mechanics, what if you could control everything in your home at the push of a button? We also built model homes, like this one at Disneyland in California. And all during this time, TV was just exploding in popularity. This is actually a photo of a TV store in southern Sweden in like the mid-1950s. TV was just taking off. Actually, RCA gave some numbers at the 1939 fair, and they actually underestimated just how popular TVs would be by the 50s and 60s. So as we were thinking about these spaces, these homes of the future, sometimes it was enough to just put these TVs in our crazy biosphere, geodesic dome, ocean villas. Sometimes we thought about what the next TV would look like. Maybe it would take over the whole wall. It would be on our ceilings and in 3D. And maybe it would just be in our head. And even before personal computing, we started to think about what else did these screens, these portals have to offer us? Could we talk to people? Could we shop in them? Maybe we could play a game of chess. And what a lot of these visions build to is this idea of this command center for your home. This really centralized, connected, intelligent space with TV at the center of it all. So, it's 2017, been a year. And while we're living in the future in so many ways, I bet that most people in this room would feel like our homes aren't necessarily one of them. We're living less like this and more like this. So how did we get here? How did this become our reality? Anybody who's set up a TV system has had this feeling before. Well, so instead of innovating the TV itself, we did something else that happened kind of slowly and then all at once. It started with VCRs in the 70s, continued with the early gaming consoles, our digital cable boxes in the 90s, this pretty big innovation called TiVo back in 2000, and then the pace just picked up. And we accumulated all these devices. And that's how we got here. By plugging all this stuff into a TV that's essentially stayed the same. Through these incremental steps, we've created this really complex ecosystem around our TVs. And that means that it's not about the TV anymore. Actually, in fact, TV's dead. Some of you might have seen this on the conference schedule and be like, wait, why are we talking about TV? Didn't millennials kill TV? And yeah, that's totally true. These things, you can actually still buy these at the supermarket, both here and in the States. They just give you the TV schedule and tell you what you're going to watch, as if you're going to sit down at 8 p.m. and sit through all the commercials. No, this is totally dead. Instead of doing this, we do this. Get the content when we want. So that TV is dead, but TV as a platform actually isn't. YouTube's fastest growing platform right now across their entire product ecosystem is actually the TV. And when you look at TV sales across the globe, including the developing world, they're actually rising. More people are going to have access to TVs. So it's true, TV's dead, and we don't watch TV anymore. But we do something else with it, something really cool, something that should get us excited as designers. We use it. So what I really mean when I say designing for TV, it's not necessarily designing for the TV itself, it's designing for everything around the TV, everything connected to it, and everyone using it. And it means designing for a really complex landscape. So let's talk about this landscape a little bit. Knowing the landscape is important for anything you're designing, especially for TV, because knowing the landscape is often the first step in finding a product opportunity. Once you start to understand all the players, the devices, the technology, the users, you can start to make those connections between these and find some really unique opportunities. So what do you need to know to find these opportunities? There's 3 things: devices, demographics, and behavior. So let's start with devices. We've already been talking about this a little bit. Perhaps the biggest change in our living rooms and entertainment spaces of today than 20 years ago is simply how much stuff we have in them. This is for 2 reasons. First, just we have the internet, so we can get content and data in our homes in ways that are fundamentally different than cable and antenna. But it's also a business opportunity. So basically, your TVs aren't like your phones. You don't buy a new TV every 2 years. You can actually hold on your TV for a pretty long time. It's just not a great business to be in. So while you can't sell people new TVs, you can sell them all of these things, these relatively inexpensive little devices that you can plug into your TV. And likely you can sell people multiple of these. We also have these other devices, these things that are with us at all times. And what we started to do is use some of those devices, along with our phones, to start casting things to our TV, using things like AirPlay and Google Chromecast. And when you look at it from this perspective that, wait, TV is just another screen, you can start to open up some really interesting possibilities. This might seem really obvious, but when you start to remove the TV from the very traditional TV watching, maybe there's something interesting here. One of the other interesting devices that's entering our home is the voice assistants. So we've had voice in our TV platforms already, but most often it's in the form of search, just basic transcription, and even then you still need that piece of hardware to speak into. So at Google I/O this year, the Android TV team had some really interesting updates. The first one was something that was kind of obvious but really nice, which is that if you have a Google Home, you could use that to control your Android TV. So you can do that same searching, but not necessarily rely on a piece of hardware, which is pretty nice. But remember, what happens if we start to think of the TV as just a screen? They also hinted at something else that they're working on, something they haven't released yet, but Google has a lot of products They know a lot about you, and there's this big screen in the middle of your homes. What can we do with it? The example that they give is pretty dry. It's sort of just, ask it to display your calendar. Certainly functional, but when you think about like what Tobias was talking about earlier, what are the kind of engaging and expressive experiences we can start to design for the TV when we start to think of it as just a screen? If you have used any of these voice assistants, you probably had that moment where you thought, oh, I just want to see that. If you're getting your news briefs and they're talking about some sort of event, you just want to get that clip. You can start thinking about the interactions between these devices and what we can do with the TV. So remember, TV it's just another screen and another really cool thing that we can design for. But exploring the possibilities of the TV, of this kind of new screen for us, it gets a little complicated because of the changing demographics in our home and in our living spaces, particularly around the TV. Traditionally, TV watching, it was sort of centered around the very nuclear family. The father controlled the TV, everybody was watching the same thing at the same time, but that's not the reality anymore. We're designing for an older generation of users that have grown up with TV, but it's increasingly being left behind these new technologies. We're designing for kids who are growing up with and being shaped by these technologies. We're designing for evolving social and living arrangements, friends, roommates, co-living, co-working spaces. Hey, we're even designing for Netflix and chill. This is the Netflix switch button. I don't know if anybody saw this when it came out maybe 2 years ago. This is a bit of an aside because we're not really going into Internet of Things territory, but this is a button that you press. It'll dim the lights, turn on your TV, turn on Netflix, put your phone on silent, maybe order some food. And when I talk about knowing a landscape really well and designing for it, this is what I'm talking about. So there's this tension in designing for the home, this need to design for everybody. This is especially true when you're designing something for a gaming platform like Xbox or PlayStation. Likely there's one or two people in the home who might be really hardcore gamers. They know this piece of hardware really well and they're really comfortable with it. But there's probably also somebody who just wants to pick up the controller once a week and watch a show. And you need to be able to design for both of these people. On the other hand, sometimes you need to design really specifically, like for kids. Kids understand UI pretty well, but their motor skills aren't quite there yet. This is a really smart design. It's on the Apple TV. So no matter how hard or soft you swipe, you'll just go to the next item. And they only show you 3 items at a time. Really, really great for kids to use, a little frustrating for adults, but something that's very well designed for its audience. But TV also poses a number of physical, visual, and audio accessibility challenges. I'm so glad that Kat talked about this in detail earlier today. And I just want to talk about a few of these things that are relevant for TV as well. It's something we're getting better about talking about as an industry, but not always integrating into our design practices. And the first step to do that is just to become aware of them. Audio accessibility. It's very big for TV in 2 ways. The first is just it's very important for TV for 2 reasons. So the first is there's kind of this cultural lag that happens. People who are blind or have low vision, they have to often wait an extra period of time. That Game of Thrones episode will come out until it's accurately described for them. So think of your favorite show. Sure, you can listen to the dialogue, but so much of that action is nonverbal. And similarly, they'll navigate our UIs in this way as well. Another important thing for accessibility for TV and really any platform or using different types of hardware is also physical accessibility. And this is an area where Apple has done a very good job of trying to make essentially accessibility more accessible, both for people and designers. So they have the switch control feature. So all of these other types of input devices can now be integrated into Apple products, including the TV OS. So it's something to learn, it's something to get familiar with, even when you're not explicitly designing for it, to know that this is the reality of your users as well. So you want to make accessibility more than an afterthought. And the last part of the landscape is behavior. So what all this, these new devices, these evolving demographics are building to is just this fundamental change in the relationship we have with our TVs. If you've done any work in this area, you might have heard this term, the lean back experience. I don't really like it. Basically, it was originally coined to kind of describe the difference between browsing a website and watching TV, but watching TV in that very traditional kind of zombie-like sense. The term that I really prefer is casual consumption. This is something that Google came up with. The casual part really highlights the sort of relaxed mindset we have in our homes, while the consumption part still highlights an active user behavior. And words are important because they help put us in the right mindset to design for a product. So let's talk a little bit about design. Just to speak a little more broadly about product design in general, one of the ways that I like to think about design is through the different lenses of design, basically kind of the macro to the micro. It's my personal belief that the more easily and quickly you can switch between these ledges, between the business strategy and the product strategy to the really fine visual design details, the better designer you'll be and the better products you'll have as well. So for each of these lenses, I've given you a question to ask yourself as you design a TV product. So we'll start with product strategy. The big question here is, does it do one thing well? So I'm going to play a quick clip.
In tech news, media streaming giant Netflix announced its new payment plan this week, which offers users the option to just browse endlessly without watching any videos. According to CEO Reed Hastings, quote, "For just $5 a month, we're giving customers affordable access to Netflix's most popular function, scrolling through our robust library of titles and posters without ever deciding on a single one." The new
So for those of you not aware, The Onion's a satirical website based in the States. And this is funny because it's true. We've all had this experience, right? The one thing that Netflix does really, really well is just get you to scroll endlessly. But I want to talk about an example that does this really well and really smart. This is actually an example from Airbnb. It's something that's a little more of a side project for them. They haven't really integrated it or given it a lot of attention, but it's a perfect example of this idea of does it do one thing well in bringing focus to your TV platform. So as we learned just a little bit earlier, Airbnb is a very complex product, has a number of features for both guests and hosts. And so first they thought about the living room. Is this a space where this experience would be useful? And when you start to think about the collaborative nature of trip planning, yeah, friends and family gathering together to discuss their trip. But they bring all of that functionality to the TV? No. All you can do in this experience is browse listings and save them to a wish list. They know that no big booking decisions are going to happen on your phone, happen on your TV. Instead, you'll go to your phone or to the desktop. This used to be a big no for user experience. They'd be worried you'd lose users by sort of shifting them to another platform. But as we have more devices and tools available to us, we're becoming much more fluid in shifting between these platforms. Taking a step down, looking at the interaction design, the question to ask yourself here is, does it feel true to the platform? And I mean that in two senses, true to TV as a device, as well as a specific platform that you're designing for. I like to come to this idea when I'm approaching either a new piece of hardware, a new platform for myself, this idea that hardware often defines design patterns. So let's take a look at the phone. It's relatively tall and skinny. And we hold it towards the bottom. And so the horizontal tabs have emerged as a really reliable design pattern time and time again. This is also true for TVs. It's pretty long and squat, so it really lends itself to these long rows of content. But that's not the only piece of hardware that we're using when we use our TVs. We also have our remotes. And what all of these remotes, including our gamepad controllers that aren't pictured here, have in common is the directional pad, also D-pad for short. So what this means is that we can be in one place on the screen at one time and move in any one direction. So we can go to the right, down, to the left, and back up. So this also makes grids a really natural design pattern on our TVs. So let's take this idea a step further. The new Apple TV remote, actually that top part is still a D-pad, but now it's also a touch pressure-sensitive pad. So how does that change our design? Looking at search screens is a good example of this. When we're designing a search screen for something with a traditional directional pad where you can go up and over one step at a time, we want to group together the letters as closely together so that we're not spending all of our time clicking over across 26 letters to get to the end of the alphabet. But that's different with the new Apple TV remote. Because you can swipe, and because it's pressure sensitive, you could swipe really far to get to the end, or just a little bit to get a few letters over. So our UI pattern is different here. So you really need to familiarize yourself with these pieces of hardware to design the best experiences. There's another challenge too, which is because we have all of these devices to design for, we also have all of these design languages to account for as well. And you want to get to know these really well when you're designing for them. But it can be a challenge when you're designing for a product across multiple of these design languages. This was something that we encountered when we designed HBO Go back when I worked at the digital agency Huge. On the PlayStation experience, we actually spent a lot of time with the native apps, the native UI components, and we incorporated some of that into our design. We took references from what's called the cross-media bar, something that's very common on the PlayStation platform. And then similar for Xbox 360, it's a little dated now, but back in the day of 360, this was one of the first apps, and it feels undeniably 360. But you'll notice that they both still feel like HBO. So you want to carry the brand, but not the interaction design. Don't feel like it has to be the same exact experience on every single platform. You can create that cohesion through the visual design and through the brand. And so just to finish up, we'll talk a little bit about visual design. And the big question to ask yourself, and probably one of the most important ones, is simply, is it legible? 3 things that are unique to TV: density, cursor, and color. So we'll start with density. If you've done any work in this area, you might have heard the term design for the 3-meter experience. Unlike your TVs and phones, you're often far away from your TV. And this number is just essentially the average distance that a viewer finds themselves from their TV. And so when you're designing an interface, this is a Samsung Smart TV interface, you want to be careful about how much you're putting on the screen, how much density there is. This actually feels less like a TV interface and a little more maybe like a desktop or tablet. Compare that with something like this. This is the Zova Fitness app on the Apple TV. Now, admittedly, this is a different view, but it feels like TV is a focus on a big image. There's a lot less density, very carefully chosen pieces of data here. So you want to set basic guidelines early in the process. Set your type sizes, kind of how big you want each of your elements to be, and set those early in the process. And when in doubt, just make it bigger. You're not going to go wrong with making something bigger on TV. Next is cursor. So this is something that's very unique to TV. We talked about the D-pad, how you can only be in one place at one time. Sometimes a cursor can be really simple. It's just this white outline telling you where you are on the screen. Apple's done something a little bit different. They call it the focus model. So it basically creates a little bit D-space, adds a deeper shadow. But your cursor is not always in motion, and you need to be able to find it. There is a cursor here. You might be able to see it because the screen is so big, but I would argue that it's not very legible. But because the cursor is required, sometimes people think of it like an afterthought. Something cool that Google is doing on Android TV is actually integrating live video preview into their cursors. Now you're making the cursor functional. You can see that a little bit here as well. It's using a pretty standard Apple cursor state when you're just going into the series pages. But as soon as you're in there, now they add this extra element, this play indicator, to let you know that you're going to go into and play a video. So don't let the cursor be a missed opportunity. Really think about how legibility goes hand in hand with functionality as well. And then lastly, color. Color is kind of a funny one. We talked a little bit earlier about how it's really hard to sell TVs because people don't buy them. But one way that we try to market them is through this idea of better picture and better color, which is a little funny because in reality, TVs have a very limited color range. This graph here, all of these colors, that's essentially all the colors that a person not with color blindness can see. And that white triangle there, that's just what your HD TV can display. Actually, your computer monitor that you're designing with has access to more colors than can work on your TV. So the key here, and really for all parts, the density, the cursor, and the color, is just to test your design early and often. But with one important caveat: not on a brand new 65-inch 4K TV. It's going to look great on a 4K TV, and while 4K is coming, only about maybe 15% of the homes in the United States and parts of Western Europe have them. It's going to take a while for that market saturation to occur, so more often you're redesigning for older TVs. So you really want to try to test your designs on mid-range TVs. And that can be very simple. You just need a really long HDMI cable. That's what we've done in our office. This is a video we took when we were working on some prototyping for TV. We have a TV at one end of the room, really, really long HDMI cable. And then we can start to get a sense of our designs and of our interfaces. So we've covered a lot today. We started back in 1939 with the origins of TV, through these visions of the past that didn't quite pan out. And so where to next? As Tova noted earlier, the rate of progress is just rapidly changing. Voice is here, AR is coming, VR is coming, AI and machine learning. These things are all also going to work our way into our homes. So will we continue to fill our homes with disconnected devices? Will the TV itself finally evolve? Or will the TV actually finally become obsolete? I don't have the answer to any of these, but that's my challenge to you, to take some of this stuff that you've learned today and to think about it and distill it and think a little bit about the future that you want to see. Thank you.